If you're not running your board appropriately, we're going to step in and we're going to put you right on track.
That was Ontario's Education Minister Paul Calandra back in November. And since then, the government has stepped in. 7 school boards are now under provincial control. This is all possible thanks to Bill 33, the Supporting Children and Students Act. It allows the province to replace elected trustees with supervisors appointed by the ministry. The government says this is meant to bring stability, but not everyone feels supported. Some parents of children with disabilities describe confusion and a lack of transparency. They worry their kids will pay the price, and they're calling for change. And there's another thread we wanted to touch on: disability. Who gets to shape the stories around it? When activist and influencer Molly Burke lost her vision as a teenager, she focused on a treatment or a cure. But she discovered that can't always be the narrative. Now she's using her platform to share her story and experiences with millions and shifting societal narratives about disability. Welcome to The Rundown. School trustees are supposed to be a main point of contact for parents and students, but in several school boards across Ontario, that's no longer the case. This has some experts and parents concerned about where this all leaves students with disabilities. I sat down with Tanya Jewell, Education Advocacy at Autism Ontario, and Latoya Aldridge, a Special Education Advisory Committee representative at the TDSB, to talk about Bill 33 and how removing trustees is affecting special education in Ontario. The Education Minister, Paul Calandra, has control of a few school boards. Tanya, help us understand, what does a takeover actually mean?
So when there's a takeover, essentially, the minister, Mr. Calandra, appoints a supervisor, and that supervisor then takes on the role of the board. And so instead of having a number of individuals who have been elected making those decisions and sort of guiding the board governance, the supervisor is responsible for that.
All right. Latoya, you are a member of the Toronto District School Board's Special Education Advisory Committee, also known as SEAC. What's your role at these meetings?
I am the representative for Learning Centre 1. So part of my role is attending the meetings, representing the voice of Learning Centre 1 community for those for the special education. Going to wards meetings by trustees, which are that part is, you know, we're not it's not happening at all. So, but the good thing about being able to do things like that is that I can be able to represent more voices, because as you know, special education, it is not just about one part. There's just so many parts to it, to ensure that all the voices of those in special education are understood.
Bill 33. A lot of attention on Bill 33. How does it impact and affect special education in this province?
So that's a great question. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of things in the news. There's a lot of concern because people just don't know. And I know, like, working with Autism Ontario, I work with families across the province, I work with school boards across the province, and I support our SEAC volunteers who represent the organization, who work on SEACs with representatives like Latoya. And so one of the things we're calling for is to get a seat at the table, because there's a diversity of voices. There's not one autistic voice, there's not one special education voice, but we know policies that are informed by lived experience, that have information from the people closest to the students, the families, the educators, the support workers. Those policies are richer and they're more likely to work. If we can develop them that way, we're less likely to have appeals, we're less likely to have complaints. It's a work in progress. But right now we're seeing there's not a lot of consultation. And so that's one thing we are reaching out to all the boards under supervision to meet with the supervisors, to let them know the services we offer, but also what the concerns we're hearing from the community, so that they're aware, because many of them don't have a special education background. They're brought in for financial reasons, because they're really brought in through the deficits, the financial concerns. And so they have to tap into the experts around them. And we hear them saying all the time, like they have their experts, they're tapping in, and we're offering our voice because we know our communities need to be heard. And so really right now we don't know what it's going to look like. Some of the main concerns are around the support offices, the family support and student offices, how they're going to run, what they're going to look like. There's been discussion about the role of trustees. There's been discussion of community policing officers in schools. There's a number of those issues that we just, when we don't have information, people get afraid. And so we're not sure.
With that being said, we talked about the SEAC meetings. How have they changed since the removal of trustees? Obviously, one of them is that you're not seeing these trustees and you're not having those conversations. But what else are we seeing in terms of the changes since Bill 33?
I think one of the most important changes, the voices of the diversity of all the parents in, throughout the TDSB being amplified. So what that looks like is, the one thing with trustees is just that they are constantly trying to balance all the voices. It is definitely diverse, and really just bringing into the consideration of special education, what that looks like for those who are navigating challenges with whether it's autistic. I remember at different meetings where the parent raised a concern, and it was in regards to elopement for their child. While someone else is having a concern because they don't feel like their child is getting supported properly as a gifted student. So bringing all of those voices in the conversation and ensuring that as an elected official that those are heard. But also some other changes are really getting to understand the budget. Like, what does that truly look like? Now, one of the things that we have asked for is being able to really have the voices heard, of being able to sort of roll back the curtain on what's happening financially in terms of supporting or special education students. And normally we can get to go before the Board of Trustees and make motions and make requests. Without the Board of Trustees, then it is left up to having those conversations with the supervisors, and requests have been made to have conversation with the supervisors, and we're waiting for that.
I will mention, so we reached out to the Education Minister for comment, and we do have a statement from Paul Calandra's press secretary. It reads, "Since being elected in 2018, our government has increased education funding every year to a record $30.3 billion for school boards, including a 36% increase in special education funding despite declining student enrollment. Bill 33 is about accountability and making sure those resources are being used to support students in the classroom." It goes on to read, "To ensure parents' concerns are heard and addressed, student and family support offices are now open at the 5 supervised boards to give families clear answers and timely solutions." Tanya, what are your thoughts on that?
So I'm looking for more information, because with the funding issue, yes, they've increased the funding, but we also hear a lot from boards that they don't have the funding they need. So there's two aspects to that. You want to look at how the money's being spent so that we can be as efficient as possible and really meet student needs. And then do we have the resources and the amount of funding that we need? I don't have answers, but those are the questions I'm always raising. And then with the student support offices, we don't have a lot of information on that. There's not been a lot of conversation around how that looks at special education. So there's a protocol when you have an issue at school. Like, you start with the teacher, any kind of dispute resolution.
Right.
This is the problem, you go up from
Right.
there. And sort of like you talk to the teacher, the special education resource teacher, maybe the principal, and then you go to the supervisor, but there's a whole sort of protocol. And sometimes it can't be met, the needs in there, so there's an external one. And that's sort of when you might go to your trustee or your MPP or an external source. And so we have less of that now without the trustees. And how are the support officers gonna run? Like, what resources do they have? I know at TDSB, they had a similar office before, but they had more staff than they do now.
Okay.
And so that's an issue the trustees there have been raising. And so what kind of training are they gonna get? What kind of oversight, accountability? Will we know what kind of issues are being raised so that we can address them as a system?
Latoya, you've been advocating for education support for your children for some time now, and I am curious, what are some of the difficulties you have experienced sort of throughout their learning journey?
Yeah, so just before we get there, do you mind? I get it that the minister does bring up that increase in funding, but I think it is important to understand that there has been a consistent deficit year over year that keeps growing. So the increase in funding is, when you look at it based on the per pupil allocation that they provide for special education, that calculation, just as a comparison, last year's amount was 1.8 billion on that 1.87 billion on the per pupil.
Okay.
And the the amount for this year is 1.9. So it's that 30% looks different. So when you hear teachers saying, for example, that it is their classroom size, it is unmanageable in supporting such diverse needs for special education, and the challenges that it does sort of bring up for them, their voice, it is very real, it's very accurate. So it is important to really look at it from that aspect as well.
Latoya, can I piggyback on that? Because
Sure.
I really want to,
Yeah.
you brought up a really important point about special education, because we have to talk about two different types of funding. Because there's funding in general and there's special education funding. Special education is a right. Access to education is a right. We have many programs that are wonderful, have great benefits, but they are optional, and so those are the ones we have to look at first. We can't put them in the same pool as special education. Like when we had Bill 82 back in 1980, that made it a right. Boards can no longer say it's too complicated to educate your child, or we don't have the resources. The responsibility was put on them. And so my fear is special education always needs to be the last cut, because we're talking human rights and access. And so we just need to make those distinctions.
We have less than 2 minutes, and I have
Okay.
a couple questions
Yeah.
for you. Latoya, I do want to have a better understanding of
Yeah.
sort of your advocacy journey for your kids. What is that like, and what have the challenges been?
It's multi-layered. There is a comorbid consideration for myself and for my children, and I think navigating the whole process of understanding IEP, understanding
For people who don't know that
IPRC,
acronym,
and for the IEP is the individual education plan.
It's like a second language
for
with all
each-
the acronyms.
And then for the IPRC, it is that decision on placements for children, and having that properly understood, and having that meeting to be able to make placement decisions for our children. So just getting to the IPRC, even though my children presented with special education needs, it took years.
frustrating.
And it was frustrating. I had to stop my project management grad certificate just to be able to allocate the time and intensity, and to be able to navigate reading through the Education Act.
All right, Tanya, we have less than 30 seconds for this, but a common solution we hear is we need more money. School boards point the fingers to the province, and the province points the fingers back to the boards. Very quickly, where's the disconnect, and how do we fix it? I know it's a big question to ask, but
I'll give my 30-second answer. So the disconnect is we need to focus on the needs of students. And then we look at how we do that. And there needs to be consultation and involvement. Training is often a very fiscally easy, efficient way to increase what our school teams can have, because there's a lot of nuances. And if we can equip with some training and the confidence, our school teams are better equipped. If we have better communication with families and teams and working together, we're better equipped. And I just want to say, reach out. So at Autism Ontario, we have a number of programs and services. We run monthly workshops to understand the special education system. Because when my stepsons came into my life 13 years ago, knew nothing. As a professional advocate, I'm like, this is going to be easy. I know international systems, I know politics, easy. On my floor, crying, feeling like a failure. And I had every skill I could bring into that. So we always look at how we can support families, build community. And then I sit on a couch with someone like Latoya, and it's just amazing because we learn from each other, we support each other, and we make our community stronger, and we educate everyone around us.
we're going to leave it there. Tanya, Latoya, thank you so much for your insights. Wishing you all the best as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Molly Burke shares her story and insights with millions of followers on social media. She's now also the author of Unseen: How I Lost My Vision But Found My Voice. I want to start off our conversation with a quote from your book. It reads, "Just because I was aware this would happen someday doesn't mean I was ready for it or ever could be. And let's face it, there's no easy time to go blind, but I'd argue that doing it in the midst of puberty is quite possibly one of the worst. The universe was doing me no favors." What was it like as a teenager going through this life-altering change?
As I said in that quote, like it's probably one of the worst times I could have picked. Being a teenager is so hard. We don't give teenagers enough grace. It's really hard going from that transition of kid to preteen to teen. And I was just in the midst of that. That time in your life when you're starting to discover your own sense of style. not just what your mom puts you in. You're starting to listen to your own music, not just what's playing on the radio. You're starting to maybe figure out dating and sexuality. You're full of acne and hormones are racing. And then to lose your vision, it's like my whole world was just flipped upside down. And it was so difficult for my peers to understand because a lot of them felt like they were going through stuff. And it was hard for them to empathize and understand blindness.
You were talking about your peers. I want to talk about them. In your childhood, you not only faced a lot of bullying from some of them, but you also faced some from adults in your life where you would expect that would be sort of a safe space, a place that if you needed help, you can go to. How did you navigate those complex relationships?
When I look back, I often think one of the hardest parts about going blind was not that I could no longer see. It was that society treated me so differently when inside I felt like the same person. My passions, my interests, my intelligence, my humor, all of that was still the same, but all of a sudden my classmates are treating me differently. My teachers are treating me differently. Strangers on the street are treating me differently because they're seeing me using a guide dog or a cane or reading Braille, and they're realizing she's blind. And all of a sudden it was like they couldn't see me. It wasn't just that I couldn't see them. They couldn't see me, the real me. And that was incredibly difficult to navigate. And I think if that barrier had been removed, my journey to self-acceptance, to healing, my mental health journey would have been a whole lot easier, which is why I now do the work that I do, because I know so much of the judgment I've experienced from society, so much of the ableism that I've faced is not out of hatred, it's out of ignorance. People have not historically been given accurate access to learning about disability, about blindness. And I want to change that in the hopes of changing societal perceptions.
You talk about your book. There's this saying you use called cure culture. Help us understand, what do you mean by that?
In society, we kind of run under what's called the medical model of disability. And I more so lean on the social model of disability. So the medical model is the idea that everybody with a disability needs to be cured. They need to be changed, fixed, healed, made whole to fit into our society. And I believe that that is extremely damaging rhetoric. The reality is most people with disabilities will never be cured within their lifetime. And so to work under the assumption that everybody in the world thinks you need to change and you're powerless to do anything about that, how can you be confident? How can you feel whole? How can you feel good enough? So I really run under the social model of disability, which is the idea that the cure for disability is accessibility. The cure for disability is changing societal attitudes. The cure for disability is building a world that allows everybody who's currently living in it to thrive. And what that does is it not only unlocks my own capabilities. For example, if I'm given a Braille menu at a restaurant, I'm perfectly capable of picking what I want. But if I'm not, now my partner or my family or friends have to read it to me. All of a sudden, I am disabled. What am I disabled by? My vision loss? No, because if I had Braille, I could read it.
Right.
I'm disabled by the inaccessibility. And so if we change that, it benefits me, but equally it benefits everybody else. Every single day, non-disabled people are benefiting from innovations that were originally created for disabled people, like the straw that you drink out of,
Right.
like the slope in the curb when you cross the street with your stroller that makes it so much easier. Those were innovations for disabled people.
In terms of financial independence, that's something you talk about throughout your book, and you're quite open about, living with your parents in the early parts and how supportive they've been. But why is that so important for you?
Being a blind woman, I lack so much freedom. I lack so much independence. I lack so much autonomy. My body doesn't do what our bodies are, supposed to do. And so living in a world that hasn't considered that and hasn't been designed for that, it just puts all these roadblocks in my way. And finance is a huge roadblock for so many with disabilities. 80% of blind people in Canada are unemployed. 70 to 80% of blind people in the United States, where I live now, are unemployed. This is a massive issue. And majority of disabled people are forced to live on government assistance, which, to be very clear, is not livable.
Does not pay the bills. Yeah.
It's not livable. And I guarantee you, nobody who's on it wants to be on it. I know because I've been on it. And I have many friends who are still on it, who are trying so hard to get off. And it's a vicious cycle. It's a systemic issue that fails us and that keeps us in that oppressed position as disabled people. And I feared that so greatly. And I was really dedicated from a very young age to try to figure out, how can I not fall under that cycle and continue it? And I want to recognize that it's an extreme privilege that I've been able to do that. And that disabled people who are not able to do that, it is not a failing of themselves. It is a failing of society.
From one people pleaser to another, I have to ask, how have you learned to push, aside and stand up for yourself even when it's uncomfortable?
I'm going to be honest, it's still a battle. And it's one of those things where sometimes I win and sometimes I lose. I would say that I find it much easier in work environments to stand up for myself, because in my mind, it's like, you see my content, you know my stance, you hired me, or we're in this room because we all are on the same page. I'm willing to kind of like put people in their place a little or stand up for myself and say it as it is. But in like real day-to-day life, I honestly still find it much more difficult. And I think it comes from a position of doing it so many times and people just standing firm in their ignorance or their hatred or negativity towards me. When I get denied access with my guide dog and I stand up for myself and I tell them the law and why I have my dog there, and they still say no, every single time that happens over and over and over again, it compounds and it becomes harder to keep doing that. You get worn down. And so it's something I'm still constantly navigating, but I'm navigating it knowing and with intention. And at the end of the day, pick your battles. I can't stand up for myself every single time, all the time. It gets exhausting. But when I do it and I win, that feels really good. And it feels like I'm moving in the right direction.
I want to talk about a battle that you talk about in your book, and it has to do with a shoot that happened in your house, Allure magazine. Can you tell us a little bit about that shoot and why it was important to stand up and the change that came out of that?
I'm really passionate about using the privilege that I've built with my career for good for other people. That means so much to me because I felt like so much of my life, nobody was standing up for me or my community. And I can't do that. I can't perpetuate that cycle. And so when I got the opportunity to do an Allure shoot, I'm a makeup and fashion girl. I love all things beauty and fashion. And I talk a lot about it. I do a lot of consulting in the beauty space. And when Allure reached out to do the shoot, I was so excited. And then a crew of all men showed up. And they didn't even know what to ask me. None of them wore makeup. None of them knew anything about makeup. I think one of the first questions was, what's an eyebrow pencil? And I was like, this is not good. And I knew after doing so many interviews in my life that they did not get the sound bites they needed to make that a good video. And that really frustrated me because to me, that felt like such a huge opportunity to talk about the intersectionality of accessibility and beauty, of universal design and makeup. How do you do your makeup when you can't see? And what barriers are there to doing that? And how can we change that? And they asked none of those. They asked, what's an eyebrow pencil? And so I immediately called my manager and I was like, squash it. Like, I don't feel proud of that interview. I don't feel like that interview moved the needle forward because they sent a group of people to shoot something that they know nothing about, and that makes no sense. There should have been, at bare minimum, one woman in that room or one makeup-wearing male, if not a whole crew, a full crew of them. And Allure, to their credit, was so incredible. They sent me a huge gift basket of makeup and said, you're right. And I got this call from the producer. They set up a new shoot. It was a woman, and she said, I just want you to know that we as women have been pushing for this for so long internally, but it took one of our external talents saying something to actually push people higher up to make a change. And I want to assure you that every single person on set is going to be a woman who wears makeup and knows about makeup and is passionate about this subject. And that just meant the world to me. And it just goes to show that standing up for what you believe in has the power to have such a ripple effect that you might not even know about, but it's worth taking that chance.
That's a fantastic story. We have a couple minutes left. I have two questions I want to squeeze in. The first one is, you were very intentional about the design choices for this book. The first thing that I'll say is green is one of my favorite colors. And this is the right, perfect, beautiful shade of green. But more importantly, not only do you have Braille on the cover, but you were intentional with the font choices and how you didn't italicize, you bolded particular fonts and stuff. And I was wondering, how did you make Unseen more accessible to the public?
As somebody who consults businesses on universal design, I obviously had to put all of the efforts into designing my book with accessibility in mind to show people, to show companies in the world that you can make something look beautiful and aesthetic and be accessible. So I used the Braille Institute hyperlegible font, increased sizing and spacing between letters and words, bolding instead of italics. All of these things make it easier for low vision readers, as well as those with disabilities like dyslexia or language processing disorders. My cover photo was shot entirely by disabled women. My makeup artist was quadriplegic. My hairstylist is legally blind. My photographer was an amputee. If I'm telling people to hire disabled people, I sure as hell am going to hire disabled people and show you that it's possible. So all of those things were really, really important to me.
One last question for you. You talk about the vision board throughout your book as well. And I am curious, what's on that vision board for the future? What does it look like?
That's a great question. 2026, I want to manifest all these new opportunities. And for me, something I've realized is, I've done what I can on social media, and I'm not going to stop social media by any means. I still love it. But I've realized, as somebody who's been talent my whole life, on camera talent, that talent has the least power in the room. And I really want to go behind the scenes because we need representation at every level in entertainment. And so I'm really hoping to start being more of a producer and director, creating my own documentaries, perhaps. I also hope to continue writing. Writing Unseen was such an incredible experience, and the feedback I've received has been amazing. So I hope to continue to bring more representation to the literary world. And I do have, speaking of that, a second book coming out that is a children's book teaching kids about blindness and guide dogs. So that will be coming out in fall 2026, which I'm really excited about because in all media, disabled people have the least representation of all minority communities. And the least within that is children's media. And I really believe we need to get to children when they're young to really create understanding and empathy and compassion from the start and never build that fear or that ignorance. So I'm really excited about that.
Molly, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us on The Rundown. And it's fantastic. As one Ontarian to another, it's great to see you kicking butt. I don't know if I can say that, but really doing great stuff. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for allowing me to come on.
We are still shaping this show and we want your help. What do you want to know more about? What makes you watch? Let us know at tvo.org/rundownfeedback or leave us a comment on YouTube. Until then, I will see you next week.
Always looking for more about what's going on at Queen's Park? Nerd Out with Steve Paikin and John Michael McGrath and the On Poly podcast. Anytime on tvo.org or the podcast platform of your choice.